Well, good morning, kiddos. This promises to be a wild and woolly one today. Yeah, so welcome. Everybody's joining us. See if I can catch who's all in the chat. We got Dawn, of course, informally hip. Hey, Joe. Good morning. Joe Ray, longtime friend of mine and songwriting partner. Megsy, how are you? Sue Finelli, how are you doing? Hey, I'm glad everybody's here this morning, although, again, it's going to be a little bit different. In fact, very different. Than anything that I have done before. In fact, it's kind of a little bit of a departure from what I have intended for this channel. You can tell I didn't have the standard intro this morning. So to give you a little bit of background, I had done an interview last week, very early in the week, with Andrea McLeod, who's you will know if you listen to the Red Fox stream of Seven Ravenwolf, and that was a great talk that I had with her, but it did require some editing and some video placements and stuff like that, and it has been just a nutty week. It's been alligators and assholes all week, to be frank, and so I just did not have the time to really get into it. A lot of things happened, both just like everywhere, and so it was a lot of challenges to keep up with that. In fact, frankly, and I told Dawn this morning earlier, I really didn't feel like doing a stream this morning. Everything has just gone kind of sideways. But every time I feel that way, when I come and join with you guys and do it, there is such an energy, an amazing community of people that it just turns everything on its head, and I feel much better afterwards. But so things again went sideways, and I thought I maybe had somebody else I could drop in for a live interview this morning from Finland, but they had other things to do this morning, or well, it's evening for them, so other things to do, and so they just couldn't make it, which is fine. But then here's the kind of saving grace, and I hope this works out. I hope you guys can follow along with me. Is that yesterday? I had a kind of a revelation, if you will, and this is all going back to the original premise of this channel in the first place, which was the Awakening Project. And if you're kind of new here or you're kind of unfamiliar with that, let me just give you a little bit of a background. So if you go back all the way to episode 1, a welcome from Baldini, and that's me, by the way. Welcome, I'm Baldini. They call me the Great Baldini. I'm just the bald guy, right? Let's see. So, okay, on January 1st of this year, on a Secrets of Saturn stream with Wayne McCroy and Jason Lindgren, who I visit with often on their Wednesday night streams, I had introduced a premise that came out of conversations that I had with Wayne and some other folks, and that is something that I think we all wonder, which is why do some people become awake and aware to the deceptions around us and others don't? In fact, those who don't become aware fight very hard they fight against it, right? And they try to tell everybody how crazy they are, or stupid, tinfoil hat conspiracy theories. And there are a few particular topics that they really won't touch. So I noticed a few things. So I have, a fairly wide background, kind of I would say autodidactic polymath, but Red Fox introduced the term omnididactic. I like that, sort of a limited omniscience, if you will. To learn from everything. And I had learned very early on that interdisciplinary study is probably the best approach, because you can learn things from each aspect, and they do kind of converge. And so you can learn many things, much more about the depth of things by studying different kinds of applications in physics, from like the material hard sciences to even the squishy sciences. Like I'm very into psychology, and so going from not only psychology and that sort of stuff, but also in human nature, but also neuropsychology and neuroscience, right? The physiological way that we look at it. But one thing has come out as a result of this, and probably everybody who's here is well versed in the idea that pretty much everything that we have been shown is a misdescription at best, and if not a completely manufactured lie. They like to take everything and turn it on its head to ultimately, I think the goal is to, again, hide from you where you are, who you are, and what's going on around you, and keeping people basically without any foundation. There's no solid groundwork. They have hijacked our history, as well as who we are, the nature of who we are, and how we got here. And these things make people very easy then to manage. We become very pliable, and the power of suggestion is something that has been a huge aspect in all of this. And this is taking cues from a number of different sources, including, for example, George Orwell, who's the author of 1984, a lot of stuff from Aldous Huxley, who the author of Brave New World, among others, a guy named Marshall McLuhan, who wrote a classic book if you're at all into media, which is called The Media is the Message, and he did a lot with linguistic determinism and the way people think and operate. One of the things that McLuhan taught us was that from studies really early on in the early part of the 20th century, they had determined that people who had become literate, that is, learning to read and write, before being exposed to any sort of electronic media, and at the time that was simply radio, they were able to think and process information in a way very unlike those who had been exposed to media. So once people were exposed to electronic media just in the form of radio. And keep in mind that much of the early radio, in addition to music and news, had to do with radio theater and radio drama. It was theater of the mind. That's what we always called radio, was theater of the mind. But then this became extremely exacerbated when they introduced television, and television reached a market saturation during the late 1950s, early 1960s. And a repeat of the study showed again that those who had been become literate prior to being exposed to the media of television were, I hate to use the word smarter, but they certainly had a way of managing data and information and processing it in a logical thought process that was far and away more advanced than those who had been exposed to the electronic media of television. And this is just in terms of the media source and what it does. And then when you look more closely, for example, television has some very insidious aspects about it. And some of those are that the flicker rate, which is the refresh rate, and the way that it works. Keep in mind, for example, film. When you watch a movie in a theater, it works on the premise that the eye has a base flicker rate. And so it's about 18 is the base number for humans, and that means that 18 frames per second would give the illusion of motion. And they use a standard in film of 24 frames per second to show you individual static frames. And when it goes by you at 24 times a second, it gives the illusion of motion. And so your eye, the flicker rate of your eye, doesn't compensate for that. And so it appears to be a smoothly moving thing. Well, in video frames, the standard is 30 frames per second, or they use a drop frame, so it's like 29.99. It's a drop frame methodology. But what happens there is that refresh rate, now they're at 60 hertz, so it's 60 instead of 30. But what it does is it corresponds to the cyclical aspects of your body and your brain. And so it puts you immediately into an alpha wave state. And that alpha wave state is such that that's the brainwave state that makes you very susceptible to the power of suggestion. And it was many of the suggestions made by Aldous Huxley that demonstrated to me that they had, I say they, I guess that's the quote, air quotes, they had learned how to employ what we would now call hypnosis to, again, use the power of suggestion to get people into this alpha brainwave state to be very suggestible, and that there is a Pareto distribution, that is the 80-20 rule, across the populace, that 20% of the people are very susceptible to it, 20% of the people are not very susceptible to it, very difficult. And the remaining 60% line up on a bell curve, standard bell curve distribution, but they can, again, do things to increase their output and their efficacy in this process. So overall, I had this premise, so all that to kind of get here. Overall, I had this premise that there was a way, it wasn't just a matter of intellect that determined who woke up and who did not. There were a number of aspects that we could probably, if we took a look at some of the data and look for pattern recognition, was something that I'm pretty good at and always have been. And I thought that I had a pretty good chance of finding being able to quantify the difference between the red pillars and the blue pillars, if you will, and what made the difference. And so I began with just a very small data set, but I understood implicitly what I was doing. And so I asked for the following data from people, which was first their date of birth and the location, so I could get the astrological information out of there. Then a recent Myers-Briggs type index, MBTI. It's a personality assessment. Again, it's not the end-all be-all. It just basically divides into 4 different categories the way that you process information. Each of those has a bipolar output, so it's 2 outputs, and that gives 4 categories, each with 2 outputs, for a total of 16 groups in the matrix that you can come and fall into. And these have to do, again, with the way that you process data. It's not really, again, the idea of a personality test is not really cogent in that sense. What it really does is it sort of measures how you're most likely to manage and process information. And again, it's a little bit squishy there. And then finally, what I asked for was just a kind of a summary, a synopsis of your own awakening process and what happened and how you got here. That's actually where I get most of the information from, because when you understand the way we lay down memories, it has very little to do with just the information itself. It has very much to do, because we can store anything as a memory, but it has very much to do with the emotional value that we put on it, its meaning. And the way that we assign meaning to something has very much to do with the memories that we store and withdraw. And I'm going to touch again on this, because what has been proven over and over. So again, keep in mind with the fact that we have been misdescribed, who and what we are, and everything has been misdescribed. One of the things that's been misdescribed badly to us is, over the last 150 years or so especially, this view of hyper-materialism and making everything into just a material thing. If you cannot touch, smell, taste, hear, feel it, then it does not exist. And so there is nothing beyond that has any relevance or meaning. In fact, those things are crazy. But more so that we have been engaged in this idea that we are but machines, that the human body is a machine and the human mind basically functions as a computer, and that we should think of it in these ways. And this is what's led to, again, as Wayne McCroy often describes, transhumanism. And we do a lot of focus on that, because that does seem to be very much where those people in charge, I hesitate and don't like to use the word elite or anything like that, because they simply aren't. They are in a group, a small group of secret societies, and a variety of them, but they all basically, to my view, serve the same master. Many of them are true believers in what they're doing, but I think they are also lied to. What I'm trying to get to here is that they know well how the human body and mind functions, and it's not the way that they're describing it. And so they point us in the wrong direction over and over and over to hide things from us and make it difficult to understand the nature of the world in which we live. So this is going to be, so I had this, all right, so the Awakening Project, and so what happened, again, I got, started out with just under 100, and then we ended up with now more than 350 respondents to the Awakening Project, and it's still open if you want to send me your information. I'm still in phase 1. It became a much bigger thing than I intended, but Unintended Consequences, that's the name of the channel, right? So you can still reach out to me, unintended.consequences3@gmail.com. It's in the channel, or it's in the show notes for today. And I had, again, some premise and some idea of what would come out of that, and it served it gave me proof of concept, certainly, that there were some corollary things, but also there's some other things that I found a little bit surprising. I don't know, maybe it shouldn't have been, but it was. And a few of these aspects are what the quality of people are that were responding, that are in this group, and that is that they are very transparent and very thoughtful, and they're just good people, the kind of people that you would want to hang out with. They're open-minded. They're generally compassionate and considerate of others. Not 100% all the way across the board in everything, but for the most part, these are amazing people. That's you. You guys are awesome. And I wanted to tell these stories. And I also found that many people find themselves isolated. While our numbers are increasing and growing, the distribution is such that we're a very small percentage. And so it's more likely than not that you don't have any or very few people around you with which you can discuss these things to any degree. And in fact, what's more likely is that you're going to have people close to you, your family, both your extended family, your nuclear family, and your significant other, who may not be on board with this, and again will fight back against you. And I've seen marriages and families destroyed over someone waking up, and that's again not unusual. When I did counseling, I found that people who were making positive steps in their lives, when they broke the dynamic, because a relationship becomes its own sort of organism, when they made changes, even very positive changes, it upset the dynamic such that the other person was very difficult to deal with for a while, even if those changes were positive. In fact, sometimes especially when they were. So it creates these schisms amongst people. And I wanted, part of the purpose of this channel, in fact, was to give people a way to connect with one another and understand that you are not alone in this, that this is a very important part. We need connection, and from my view, one of the primary parts of the human condition and what we are is that we need relationship. And this is again consistent to me. If you listen to my Sunday streams, which are more spiritual in nature, began with Wayne McCrory doing Sola Scriptura, and now I do a morning presentation called Ancient Wisdom for a Modern World, but looking at this idea of a creator who largely, again, created us to be in his image, but specifically because he was very lonely and wanted companionship and relationship. And he made us the same way, that we should be in relationship with one another. And what struck me as very interesting in this latest thing with this pandemic, of course, is the idea of separation, the social distancing. They want to keep us 6 feet apart. And that immediately struck me. And I mentioned when I was a guest on Iron Realm Media on a Friday show that it is very consistent with the idea that, again, we have an electromagnetic field that emanates from the human body because we are organic, electric, chemical beings, and we have an electromagnetic field that we both send and receive from. We can get more into that, but I think you've probably at least been exposed to the idea before that we have neurotransmitters in our thorax. They call it the belly brain, from which we both send and receive about 3 feet at least into our surrounding environment. And so by making people stay 6 feet apart, we cannot interact with other people because 3 and 3 is 6, and so they want to keep you far enough away that you cannot interact with people. And it makes people literally go crazy because we're designed to be in a relationship with one another, and not being able to connect with other people is, again, it's inhuman, it's devastating. So all that, I guess, to get here. So in thinking through these things, and then I was listening to a presentation that came out yesterday from Ken Wheeler, and none of the ideas that he presented were to me new, but they, especially part of it, because what he thinks of is kind of, I've been studying certain aspects. In fact, one of the ways that many people who are here initially heard me on Crow 777 radio as a guest and talking to him about the surveillance state. But initially our contact and what the show was originally going to be on was the incredible nature of water and what water is. And I still haven't done that show because it is so deep, if you will, but it is a fascinating, amazingly deep topic. Water always fascinated me. I was into chemistry and organic chemistry, but water has so many unique properties that defy what we understand in terms of material science, that it's not only amazing, but again, life cannot exist without water. So water and sunlight are the two primary things that we need to survive life as we know it anyway, within this material plane. And so the ideas that he presented, and I'm going to, I put the link to that video in the show description, and I'd like for you to at some point take a listen to that. He's an interesting character, and he certainly does a lot on magnetism and a variety of things. And Cami, Nodell is a big fan, and I hope that you were able to listen to last week's presentation with Cami, The Rocks Cry Out, because that is kind of a foundational idea. That's kind of how I got here to the ideas that I'm going to present today. Let me take a big deep breath. Hang on. Big deep breath and a big hit. No, I'm kidding. That's just a Cigarette is bad for me. I gotta quit. All right. So I had some ideas, and it came out of nowhere, and thus the title of today's show, Out of Nowhere. Something hit me, and I hope that I can do this in a way that you can follow along. I was scrambling this morning to try to find a way to put this together because it is so oblique and obtuse that it may, I don't know, fracture your mind. And if I can get an idea, if I can do this well, at least it will give you a sense of what is going on here. Okay, breathe. Okay. There are some things that I need to cover to help explain what I think is going on here. And this is just a quick caveat. Much of what I'm doing when I get to the end, the conclusions are hypothesis and speculation, but most of what I'm presenting up until that point is not. It is hard facts, and there's evidence for that. There are a couple of places where it's going to detour and diverge from the mainstream narrative. But again, I think most of you know that is that is mostly misdescribed, and I'll explain those points when we get there. But the substantive foundation for why we describe it in a different way versus the mainstream narrative do have again empirically proven things that we can show what's going on. All right, so the idea. Let's talk first about waves. One of the things that I do for work has to do with wave transition. And wave function, often audio, which is sound, and sound are pressure waves that travel through air in a process known as compression and rarefaction, and that's basically the compressing of air and then rarefaction. It introduces energy in a longitudinal, it's a longitudinal. These are transverse waves, what you see in the screen here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. You will when I show you some other things here, but here are waves that you're seeing here, and these waves are called transverse. That is, they go up and down. A longitudinal wave goes back and forth, and that's what sound does. But we often represent it in this transverse way so that you can see it better, basically. But here is what happens when you introduce waves together. You get wave interference in a process called constructive and destructive interference. Constructive interference is when you get two waves of a similar signode going at the same time. Here they're showing them at the same, on the left side of the screen, they're showing them at the same basic frequency and amplitude. Frequency is how many times, or the difference between the peaks and the trough. Amplitude is how high the peaks and the troughs go. So wave 1 and 2 are identical in that sense. When you put them in phase or at the same time together, you see at the bottom wave 1 plus wave 2, the purple line, and indicates that it's constructive interference. In other words, it adds together. On the right-hand side, you put them out of phase, or flip the polarity, if you will, so that they're out of phase with one another. And you can see that when the amplitude and frequency are identical, they basically cancel each other out in what's called destructive interference. All right, so here's another view of that. Again, this is just a very simple view showing you that with the same amplitude and frequency, what you get is a cancellation. You can see that the green and the blue are the two waves. When you put them out of phase, the red line is the result. Both there's constructive and destructive interference. Here's a bit more complex view because this is something that I want to kind of, again, get into your head, these ideas that the waveforms interact with one another. And one of the things that I did with creating audio products is that the human ear has a frequency response, or the ability to hear, typically between about 20 hertz on the low frequency up to about 20,000 hertz on the high frequency. Although that's within a range of variance. I had an incredibly good hearing, in fact, unheard of, that I don't know anybody that I've ever met or even heard of that had the frequency response that I did as a teen. At 17, one of my tests, I was able to hear well up to about 32,000 hertz. I could hear actually dog whistles and television monitors. They were CRTs, cathode ray tubes, and they would drive me crazy. They were such high-pitched, loud squeals that it would drive me crazy, and I couldn't sit near a television or a computer monitor, which were very new at the time. But teachers thought I was crazy because I was like, I can't sit near that. It's driving me crazy. And they're like, what are you talking about? I thought, you don't hear that high-pitched squeal? So let me pause for a moment. I will try to catch... yeah, you guys are just kind of chatting amongst yourselves. Good. You're ignoring me, which that's great. Okay. All right. So here we have constructive and destructive waves, and this is terms of audio, kind of what we're showing here. And again, this is just another interaction showing this. So the constructive interference, that's figure A, figure B, destructive, figure C, and when you put them of different amplitude and frequency, then you get a modulated pattern. And so this idea of creating audio products, what we discovered was that when you have a bandwidth, or the available frequency range is well beyond human hearing, like up into 100,000+ hertz. Again, it shouldn't make a difference because we can't hear that high. And yet, what we find is when the bandwidth is increased, everyone prefers that source. And the reason for that is because it modulates one another. So the higher frequencies, even ones that you cannot hear, they modulate the lower frequencies. They become, again, this idea of constructive interference and destructive interference, they modulate them such that it creates a warmer, thicker, richer sound, and something that we prefer, and it becomes more natural. So here you have D, figure D. This is also beats, and you can that's something that they use now with EMDR. You get the addition of two waves with slightly different frequencies, and it creates a beating pattern. This is what happens, for example, when you tune a guitar. And both Joe Ray and Trey Clark will tell you that when you tune a guitar, you get two strings, and you put your finger on one fret, so it's the same note. And then you begin to tune them, and you can tell when they're slightly out of tune because you hear this wah, 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 wah. And then as you begin to get them closer, it goes wah, 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 because it's interfering with each other. And then right when they get in tune, it goes wah, 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 and they become in unison again. Don't ask me to do that again. But anyway, that's how you can tell. You use these beats that have become created when you're tuning two things to get them in unison with one another. And that is the nature of that. So now, when you look at this in real time, and hopefully you can kind of see this, it's a little bit weird on the screen here, but this idea of constructive and destructive interference, and you can see the wave patterns here. But again, waves don't actually travel in this up and down transverse manner. This is just what we use to be able to visualize them. Electricity, when we modulate a wave, use amplitude modulation, we can do that. But most things in nature are more like what you see at the bottom. It emanates in a free field using the inverse square law. What you would actually see here is that these waves here out toward the edges would become further apart because the energy per area has been reduced in direct accordance proportion with the inverse square law. So the amplitude would be diminishing, and if it's in motion, the frequency would change as well because of the Doppler effect. But otherwise, this is what you're getting. And then when you get, again, more increasingly complex patterns with multiple sources, you can see the result here of what's going on, that you get these very complex patterns. All right, so let's bookmark that and then move on a little bit. All right, so now let's talk about atomic theory. I know I'm just going to run here, and this is going to be a little bit nutty, but I'm going to try to keep it. Well, let me do this real quick. I'm going to go. Let me go back to this, and I'll show you some of these things. So hopefully I don't get a copyright strike. This is, again, claiming fair use. I'll do this at a different thing here, no sound. But this is going to just demonstrate the idea of constructive and destructive interference in a way that you can see. There's amplitude, the velocity of frequency times wavelength. So it gives you the velocity there. And then we have formulas for that. But what you'll be able to see here is that when you begin to add these things together, let's see here. Let's just run that a little bit faster yet still. All right. So you get these constructive and destructive interference, right? Reflection, refraction. It happens in light because light are waves. Despite the fact that they describe them as a particle, a photon, that is not true, and we can demonstrate that as well. That's reflection and reflection. But here we have the when you put them in phase, the phase cohesive, then they get additive. When the phase is incoherent, especially, or out of phase, then you get cancellation. So that's basically there. You're going to get the cancellation as the ultimate effect. Here you can see it sort of, again, happening here. This is an interesting thing about sound, and it's a very interesting thing, is that the original point source would be way over to the far left over here, but when it hits a wall, for example, and there's a door, the sound actually begins again as a point source from that hole and begins to radiate from that hole, not going through. It actually begins again. So it's a very interesting application of some theory. Here's another thing showing you this again. Constructive and destructive interference in a way that you can visualize. Destructive interference occurs when the two waves cancel one another out, and then constructive interference will happen when the waves combine with one another. And this is an interesting example because you can see they're not identical, and you can see that it modulates one another. So that's kind of what's going on there. All right, so we'll stop there, and then I'll come back here and then move on to this idea. Everybody with me so far? I mean, this, hopefully I'm doing a good job at just explaining the basics here. Polarity, yes, exactly. That's right, Trey. Okay, so I'm going to move on a little bit because these are all part and parcel of the bigger picture. All right, so here's what they're, one of the things I loved was chemistry, and chemistry basically deals with atomic structure and chemical compounds. And so the most basic description of atomic structure is that you have a proton, basically a positively charged particle, in the center, an electron, which is a negatively charged particle that orbits around. And you can have neutrons, which have no charge but have atomic weight in the nucleus, and then these things rotate around them in different orbits, right? So this is kind of the standard thing that you have seen over and over, right? The electron orbits, the nucleus, the proton, neutron, and electrons. And they do a very good job at making it extremely complicated by introducing orbitals. There is an s, p, d, and f suborbital, each which can hold a certain number of electrons, and it is the number of electrons and the cumulative charges that they represent, that they are able to hold, along with its atomic weights, that allows us to predict, using Avogadro's constant with chemistry, what we can get to interact with each other and what cannot, and what we have to have catalysts for, and that sort of thing. And then it becomes increasingly complex. They begin to show us how these cells, or rather these atoms, combine to make molecules. A molecule is a combination of multiple atoms, and they become increasingly complex, but we can demonstrate, again, using maths, and that's something to note. Usually hydrogen bonds is what is used to demonstrate the way that they're connected to one another, and so it becomes increasingly complex that we can draw out the way that these things are held together. This is one of my favorites, which is caffeine, right, showing you the intermolecular covalent bonds between these atoms and how they're held together. Okay, so this is couple hundred years worth of science that's being demonstrated here, and again, it can be predicted and mathematically assigned during we can do chemistry with it, but one of the things that hit me when I became a geometric agnostic is that I had often considered the idea of the universe as being a holographic representation at every scale was consistent. So the idea of a solar system looked very much like an atom, as did galaxies, right? And everything began to look at differences of scale like it was the same thing. And so that felt consistent to me and kind of resonated with me. But once finding out that that is not the case and that everything has been misdescribed, including history, I immediately went back to the periodic table of elements and thought, I bet that's a misdescription, right? That is not what's going on. And so in the periodic table, they lay it out this way according to atomic weights. They start with the lightest, and this is actually not a good one. Let me show you this one because this is actually more accurate. Hydrogen being the lightest, and we've got helium, we got lithium, boron, and the noble gases, and then you go on down to the more heavy things, and these now have a greater atomic weight, and the ones down here are more rare. In fact, they're so unstable that they have to be just made in a lab. But ultimately, they describe these according to atomic weight. Well, again, one of the things that I've come to realize with more study is that almost everything is done with frequency and vibration. One of the things that, again, we're told is that 99.999999999% of everything is empty space. So if you're thinking of your table, for example, it's made up of atoms, mostly carbon, and those carbon atoms are made up of mostly space in between it. So everything would be just space. Well, why then doesn't your hand just go right through it, right? It's mostly space. It should go through it. Well, it is described to us, and this is kind of accurate, that there is, its electromagnetism has to do with that. But the way that we are put together atomically, that is the way they describe it. But I began to suspect that we were being misled when it came to that. Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to probably stop for a moment and run and get a bottle of water. And that will be, it'll mean more in a minute. All right, so here we have the periodic table of elements. But I thought this is probably a misdescription. This probably has far more to do with the idea of frequency and vibration than atomic weight, because I don't really that doesn't comport with the way we see things. In fact, it is well known within science, but often not described this way, that there is a periodic spiral of elements. And in fact, when we look at it this way, here's the periodic table of elements shown as a spiral, right? And this is consistent then with the Fibonacci sequence. Take a look at that just for a moment. I'll be back in just a few seconds. I've got to get some water. Hang on just a moment. Okay, thanks for bearing with me. Sorry about that. I should have prepared better, but I was scrambling to get some images together so I could better explain this, because I knew that I couldn't describe this without some visuals. Okay, so this is shown in a spiral, the periodic table of elements. And again, this is lined up simply according to atomic weight. But it can be described in other ways, and I've tried to describe some of these things before about how you could describe things in different ways, like music. Talked about this with Red Fox, about how music could be described, for example, as a strictly mathematical concept because of the frequency, amplitude, waves, ratios of relationships to one another with the Pythagorean theorem. We could describe it completely mathematically using formula and equations, but no one would be able to even play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star unless you were a savant, right? A mathematics savant. You would never be able to do it because it would be so complex. You could do the same thing with cooking, with food. You could describe it at a molecular level and walk through the chemical processes that happen when you cook. And if you did that, again, no one could make popcorn. So it has to do with the way that we understand things. You can describe effectively and you can say legalistically, right? You can make it mathematically work if you describe something in a certain way, but that's not the most effective way to describe or understand it. The same was true with color, with so many things. You can describe it in a complex or a simple way. Most things have been made complex. What you're seeing on the screen right now is, again, looking at helium and argon as a spiral. But on the very left at the top is Walter Russell, and he describes the periodic table of elements in kind of relationship to music by octaves. Again, we see this in the universe with this idea of a spherical symmetry, which is 4 times pi, and it breaks it out of Heisenberg uncertainty principle. But basically, you can take this and we get this spiral, again, 2 times pi I. So when we take a look then, let's take a look again. This is Walter Russell and his description of the periodic table of elements as basically a wave. And this wave is relative to octaves. And so each one, so an octave is described, again, the frequency, that is A880. right below it is A440, which is exactly half of it. But when you put them together, they're not in unison. It's an octave apart. It's exactly the relationship between them. And so this is the Russell periodic table of elements. But he also described using that that spiral. He had a spiral characteristic of all phenomena in nature. And so again, the universal one, I haven't read it, but the little bits and pieces I have read, some of it's just amazing. Some of it's, I think, again, based on his misunderstanding of some things. For example, going into gravity and that sort of stuff, which I don't agree with the way it's described. Okay, so again, moving on, trying to get you to understand how these things are interrelated and work together with one another, because ultimately I hope to really get to something that you can see here. All right, so let's back up then and kind of revisit electrons, the atomic structure, right? So then this idea, I think that they're trying to show this as a complex arrangement of covalent bonds between atoms. I don't think that's what it is. I think it is much better. And so this again is a lattice structure that we saw beginning to develop when going with we're talking to Cami about the rocks and how crystalline structures form. And this is the sort of lattice structure as described with chemistry using covalent bonds as found in the atomic structure. And they make it, again, increasingly complex until they begin to make it so complex, and then they bring us to DNA. And they describe it in the same way. They're using the double helix, but still using the same descriptive model of atomic structure and chemical compounds. And again, I think this is a misdescription, and I'll tell you why. All right, so what you're looking at now has to do with, again, when you combine the wavelength properties with waves with the idea of magnetics, and again, I think this is something that Cami would be into, and those of you who deal, maybe Zach, Good Times for All, I don't know if he's here or not, thought I saw him earlier, but again, they correlate pretty much one-to-one with these fields. So electricity and magnetism, again, are interrelated. We can put them together. They work together, and then you have this electric field and direction is what's being shown on this chart here. And when we look at magnets, this is a very simple magnetic dipole, north and south, and the magnetic field lines that it creates. This is a bit more complex. When you look at it in a three-dimensional field, you get basically a toroidal structure, and then you have the dipole equator there. And so that's a basic look at that. So this is basing it on the molecular idea. And then when you get into toroid, the toroidal field, again, this is what I begin to see as the nature of the universe. You'll see here the toroid with the positive, negative poles, but what they're kind of not showing you here, and this is what Cami and I were talking about, and again, we're not the only people to have looked at it in this way, but this circle that you see kind of in the middle there on a flat horizontal plane, that becomes the dielectric accretion disk, where everything kind of lines up right there. That's then not either positively or negatively charged. It becomes dielectric and sits right there in the middle. And that is where we would see it lie, exactly like the universe. And so if I were to, let me go back a little bit. Wait, I wanted to do this. Go back. Oh, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. Way ahead of myself. All right, so let me go. I want to go back to, it's going the wrong direction. I don't know why it's doing that. Because I'm in the wrong field. Okay, so again here with the toroid, and then we have different kinds of toroids. We have a monopole, a dipole, and a quadrupole. And this is what I think that we're actually in, is not just a dipolar, but a quadrupolar toroidal field is the nature of the universe that we're in. That's where we exist. But this is not limited only to the universe. I think it, again, scales, it functions at every scale. These are magnetic fields, what you're looking at here. This chart you're going to see again, and I'll explain better to you what this is, but this is electromagnetic influence on light, right? And light, again, this has to do with modulating those frequencies and changing frequencies of light based on magnetic interference, right? so you get the Faraday effect here, right? And so these are things that, again, most people are not taught in basic physics. Here we can see this is silica, or sand, basically, and this is a magnetic field applied to that. And as you go through the process, this is time and how quickly it happens, but they begin to become attracted and begin to organize themselves. And really what we understand is that any self-organizing field is life, even if it's material, right? Again, like carbon or rocks. If it's a self-organizing field, that is life. And that seems to be the nature of where we're at, is life. Everything is living. What you're looking at right now, this part in the middle is the cartoony part, is basically 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen atoms. That's H2O, that's water. But behind it is a scanning field showing its electromagnetic radiation from water. Okay. You guys still with me? Do you feel like you just stepped into a college physics class? Sorry about that. Ultimately, I hope to get you to a place to understand what I'm trying to get to, because I think it will, I hope that it will change some things for you. I'm going to have to go back and read your chat comments, because it just I'm trying to keep this going, and I can't get there when I'm looking at what you guys are saying. So, because I want to answer questions, but I want to get to a place that you can follow along with this. Okay, so now let's take a look at light and frequency. All right, so this is components of photoic visible light effects, and what happens here, this is doing something, and this is really basically what I want you to understand as we get to. Keep in mind, I should have probably gotten here before, which is the idea of if you put material on a surface and begin to vibrate it, you get the Clandy effects, right? And this is what would call cymatics. The cymatics is the organization of particles. If you put them on again, like sand or a fluid, any media that you put and begin to vibrate it, it begins to organize itself into these fields, and these fields begin to take on patterns. All right, and so as we see these patterns develop, this is actually what's being shown here is hydrophobicity, or something that's averse to water, and there's a reason for that, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But again, here's that same chart, and again, what we're showing here, the reason I'm showing this twice is it has to do with this is electromagnetic permeability happening to light. It is changing the structure of light just with electromagnetism. All right. And so now we begin to see some interesting things happen here. So my premise is that the periodic table of elements, the reason it organizes itself in that way is not having to do with what we call atomic mass, right, or atomic weight, but has to do with its frequency and the way that it vibrates, and that you can combine those, quote, atoms with, or the material elements with one another based on its frequency, and they must be of a similar frequency to combine with one another, or it becomes it becomes chaotic, right? So in the similar way that if I take a note, that's a C, and I combine the perfect fifth, right? It's harmonizing. But when I use a different note, it becomes dissonant, right? I just dropped down a half step and it becomes more dissonant, and it wants to resolve. So if you get two frequencies that do not wish to resolve, they wouldn't stick together well. But if you get frequencies that do relate and correspond well to one another and harmonize well, then they will stick together in a certain way. Or you could add a third item, a catalyst, if you will, and then modulate those frequencies such that you can get them to stick together. And this is what I think is a better description of what's happening on the periodic table. And I've done some basics, some rudimentary math, and it seems to hold true. Again, I haven't got it all worked out, but when you apply Avogadro's constant, which is the numeric value that we use to measure the potentiality of electrons in a orbital, and again, the quantum leap, the quanta is the smallest particle. Quantum leap is being able to jump from one of those orbitals to another, and that's the way it's been described. That atoms stick together and make molecules is that an electron will sort of go into both, right? It's got a potentiality between atoms, and it'll be able to hold those two together in a matter of covalent bonding. Again, I think that is a misdescription. I think that what's actually happening is that the frequencies are such that they are able to join together in a way that allows them to stick together. Just to be basic, they stick together or they harmonize with one another. All right, so I'm going to skip over to. Well, let me do this. I want to just show you this thing here. I have to go. Where is that? There. And then show you this. I'm not going to show you any of his video, but this is what you're looking for, the Ken Wheeler video, Water, Memory, and Instincts. So what he's describing in that has to do with these items that for ages, right? Again, we've been told that the brain works like a computer, and the computer has storage. And that storage stores our experiences, and what we would call memory. However, the more we understand and the more we know, and we get down to neurons and axons, and they begin to map the brain and go through this process, right? As they begin to try to explain to us where things are held, like you've got the vision center of the brain, and you've got this area does this and this area does that. But as they begin to try to do this and map it out more and more in modern science, what has been shown, they keep trying to find out where memories are held. And it turns out memories don't really seem to be held in the brain. I want you to think about that for a moment. Memories are not stored in the brain. We can prove it. It seems to be stored kind of around your body in a field. It's pretty weird, but we can prove that it's not held in the brain. In fact, as Ken Wheeler describes in that video, one of the things that happened is that he has a late wife, and she died from having a glioblastoma brain tumor. And I had a very close friend of mine who also did. Most people die within about 18 months, and my friend went about 5 years. His wife went nearly 10 years. And he demonstrated by showing a grapefruit, and he said, this is the size of the area. This is what they took out of her head. It's a huge portion that they took out of her head. And he's like, she lost, she had a beautiful singing voice. She lost that, as well as some other random things, but her memory was sharp as a tack the entire time. It did not affect her memory. My wife and I have looked, we watched a film about a gal who got some weird disease, and it basically turned her brain into soup. And they removed like 95% of her brain. She had like 5% left. And ultimately, she not only recovered, she had most of her personality. You couldn't tell hardly. She had just a few oddball things, but mostly she did just fine. Now, we get to this idea of, for example, in the movie Lucy, and it's long been kind of this meme that's out there that we humans only use 5% of your brain power, and the rest of it. But that's, again, a total misdescription. What the idea in the movie Lucy is, of course, if you begin to use more and more of your brain, that you begin to ultimately have this apotheosis. And of course, in the movie of Lucy, she basically turned cybernetic and turned herself into consciousness in a computer. That's, of course, the idea that they want to push. However, we can demonstrate empirically that memories are not held within the brain. Now, I know I'm jumping around a lot here, so bear with me. But one of the reasons, again, I struggled so much to demonstrate or to do this episode on water is all the crazy things that water does. There are 42 at least material properties of water that are just basic functions. For example, the fact that as you begin to cool a liquid, it begins to want to solidify, right? So water freezes, it goes into its solid state, and that's ice. But things become more dense as they cool down, and this is described by the energy of the electrons becomes less and less and less, and so the molecules move with less energy until it finally becomes a covalent source, or a covalent bond seizes up and it becomes a solid. But water, it is its most dense, 3 degrees above freezing. Well, that's pretty interesting. If it didn't do that, if it was its most dense as a solid, it would go to the bottom of water, and then once water froze, it would continually go to the bottom, never never thaw, and no life could be sustained there. It would be all kinds of crazy. And so water, this is why, for example, when you put, let's say, a fluid in the freezer, what actually happens is that when it turns to ice, the water or the fluid expands and it breaks the item. So it does not become more dense. It actually becomes more dense to a certain point and then flips over. That's just one aspect. There's others, like physical property of water. Water is wet. Oh, that's pretty interesting, Rand, dude. It's like water's wet. That's crazy, man. So Ken, what are you telling me? I mean, no, water. If that's a physical property of water, it's wet. That means that it can attach itself to other things, and you can clean with it, and it cleans better when you heat it up. So there is a bunch of things. Water has what's called an exclusion zone, and this is considered the fourth phase of water. So 3 phases of water: liquid, solid, and gas. Water vapor, steam is a gas. But the fourth phase is the exclusion zone. It organizes itself in such a way that it begins to surround things that gets put into water. And then Cammie, again, within her conversation with Red Fox, showed these great images of the seas meeting, and there's 2 completely different colors and salinities of seas right next to each other, and they don't intermix. This has to do with the exclusion zones of water. It's called EZ. Again, you can look this up. There's all kinds of stuff out there. And I'll not try to get too deep into this, but what I want to express to you is these ideas. And I would encourage you to watch this video of Ken. It's not very long. It's 20, 25 minutes, something like that. But the really salient points are that, so we have been learning of late that memories are transmittable, we call it genetic memory, right? And the idea that the genome somehow holds especially trauma and can pass it on genetically. And they demonstrated this, for example, with worms. And they exposed worms they sort of did the Pavlovian response with they would expose worms to a bright light, and then when they did that, they would shock them. And so ultimately the worms would recoil when exposed to a sudden bright light because they expected the horrible shock, as you would. But what they discovered then is one of the things about these particular worms is that they have this amazing regenerative property, which would be pretty cool for humans. But if you cut this worm in half, the front end will grow another tail. The tail end will actually grow another head and brain and eyes. What the hell? And this all has to do with, again, what we call morphic resonance zones. And this has to do with, again, all the information. The DNA in your eyeball is the same as the DNA in your kneecap. Right? So why does one make an eyeball cell and why does one make a kneecap cell? They've been trying to figure this out forever. And this has to do, again, some of the ideas have to do with morphic resonance zones, that it is this morphism, this geomorphism that tells it what to become. This stuff is crazy. But working with these worms, what they discovered, again, was that you could chop it up in 10 pieces, and each piece would grow the appropriate pieces. It would just regenerate. But each of those 10 pieces, once it had learned to be afraid of the bright light, they would respond similarly to the bright light. So the memory of it was somehow held in the genome. Well, this got the scientists thinking, what if, and this kind of gets to a gross part, they took one of these trained worms and they put it in a blender, they pureed it, and then they involved other worms in a cannibalistic ritual. Sorry, I don't mean to be gross, but they basically fed this worm to other worms. And those other worms learned through osmosis to be afraid of the bright light. Think about that for a moment. So through the consumption of the other worm, which had learned to fear something, they became afraid of it as well. And this then goes back to many ancient cultures who practiced cannibalism with the idea that you could absorb the energy of your opponent or your enemy when you killed him and ate him. There's apparently something to that. But here's what Ken's getting to, and there goes your breakfast. I know, Megsy, I know it's not pleasant. I'll stop with the gross parts, but here's what Ken is expressing, and I will have to agree with him on this because of my study into water. He says that they're right, but only partially right. It is not the DNA necessarily that's carrying the memories. It is the water. within the DNA. See, water has memory, and water remembers things that have happened to it. And interestingly, if again, here's another video, maybe I'll try to get you guys hooked up to that. So if you do some research on Victor Schauberger, who was an Austrian forester from the early part of the 20th century, he discovered his whole thing was observe nature and copy nature, and he began to understand vortex fields and how vortexes work in water and the amazing properties of water. And this is part of my study into water. But he discovered that water has a kind of memory to it. Now, this is, again, well before the work of Dr. Emoto and the impression of water with intention. We'll talk about that briefly, but I'm sure most of you are familiar with this idea. But water can hold the memory, and what's more, pass it on to other molecules of water. There's a company in Europe called Grander, and there's a video called Grander Water, What We Know as a Drop. And it was another video I watched in research of water. But what they do is essentially they have what they call revitalized water, or water that they've somehow impressed with a better memory. And they run water in a system next to it, and they transfer the memory of the one water to the other, so that they use it in a commercial fashion in Europe. So they use it for baking, they use it for commercial cleaning purposes, and many of the people, and again, keep in mind that Germans are very, as a culture, I'm trying to pigeonhole anybody, but as a culture, they're very logical, and the language is that way. It's very, very detailed, and so they're good at like engineering and that sort of stuff. And so they think in engineering ways, and they're usually not given to woo, right? They want science to back stuff up. And while this seems very woo, they have to admit that it actually works. That they were changing seals and valves continually in these commercial systems where water was a coolant through these pipes, miles of pipes in a factory. And the water would get trashed, basically. And so when they use this system of running the water in a process that they don't describe for, again, intellectual property purposes, exactly what happens, but essentially they run the water next to other water and impress the memory in one direction, so it's not the other way. And they immediately stopped having to change all that stuff. It cleaned the water. Other people were using it for swimming pools instead of chemicals, instead of using the chlorine. And it literally changes the structure of the water. And you can look at it again under microscopes. You can look at its chemical structure. It's changing the chemical structure of the water. And then we get to Dr. Emoto, which again, you impress intention upon water, and he does. There are all kinds of photographs out there of him photographing ice crystals after different emotions are impressed upon them, and the water takes on the form of the energy. Pause there as I have some water. Okay, you with me so far? I'm not done yet. All right, so Ken Wheeler's proposal, and I would have to say I agree with him, is that when the worms are eating the other worms and gaining the memories through osmosis, they're not necessarily getting it straight from the DNA, they're getting it from the water. Keep in mind that the human body is between 65 and 86% water, depending upon a number of factors, your age, your biology, your gender, that sort of thing. But we are mostly water. And again, water is necessary for life. What's the process called? I think the process of revitalization is what they call it with the water. Again, you can look up Grander, Grander, water. There's a video on YouTube called Grander Water, What We Know is Just a Drop. I think it's probably 40 minutes, something like that. But they go through a basic of Victor Schauberger. You can find other videos on Victor Schauberger and his stuff and what he did with vortex. And they're kind of dancing all around it, but these ideas are all kind of intertwined. And what I'm trying to get to here is, again, this idea that we are, comprised mostly of water. Water contains memory. In fact, ultimately what I get to is water shows a kind of intelligence. It shows a sort of sentience and a preference for certain things versus others. And so this is why I've explained that when I make coffee, I put intention into the water before I make it. I put intention when I'm cooking and do food, and people actually can tell the difference. It's even if I don't tell them the process, it happens. Yes, when people get organ transplants, they get memories. Absolutely, Bob. It's happened, been reported many, many times that people will get an organ transplant, a heart or a lung transplant, and they will take on some of the character, like food preferences, or even having specific memories of the person who donated the organ. It is fascinating stuff. And again, well outside the mainstream science narrative. So what I want to get to, I just want to try to push through this so I can get these ideas because they're all interconnected with one another, right? But again, we've been told that the brain works as a computer; it's easily programmed, that sort of stuff. But I'm going to get to this idea of what I think is going on here, because it all comes back to this awakening project and what is going on, and I think can help explain what's happening to you and what's happening around you, and why some people awaken and some people don't. So first thing, I think it would just make sense, just from what I've explained so far, that you should take care to get good water, right? Yeah, because it's important, right? And when they trash the water, almost all tap water is basically piss water. I mean, they go water treatment plants. That's what they do. They take piss and shit and go, as Don Pettit says, chugga, 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 and then you get a cup of coffee. You get a cup of coffee. Yeah, he's got a PhD, right? Okay, fuckwit. Sorry, that guy just drives me nuts. Right? He's supposed to be super smart, and he's a freaking window licker. Anyway, and a liar, to boot. But, yeah, chugga, 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 then you get a cup of coffee. Yeah, no, I ain't drinking that shit. That's for sure. But most tap water is this nasty, trashed, I'm going to go evil water. They put evil intention into it in electromagnetic radiation. Keep in mind, again, we can, correlation maybe not equal causation, but we can certainly draw a direct line between every single integration of new electromagnetic forces into the environment, from the stringing of electric lines all over the world to radio and wireless communication, television, and now Wi-Fi, and now 5G. Every time they introduce a new one and go into a different bandwidth and increase the amplitude and the current, we get, humans suffer. In fact, much of what we would think of as cancer didn't even appear in the medical records until electricity. So, for what it's worth. Electromagnetic radiation, if you've ever worked in the field, and Bob Nodell, I know you know this because you worked with microwaves, that the idea that we can, if you, again, just take just like an extension cord, right, and you put iron filings near it, you'll see the electromagnetic radiation, line it up. If you take photographs of it and use the filters so you can see the electromagnetic lines, the amount of electromagnetic radiation just coming from an extension cord is ridiculous. This is running through your house, right? It's all around you. For example, fluorescent lights put out what's called dirty power, and it makes it really incoherent waves that are really bad for you. The idea that we put out all these things without even testing its effects on organisms, well, it would be preposterous unless you come to the idea that it's done intentionally, that they knew that this would have this negative effect and a deleterious effect on human organisms. It's made us not only sick, but dumb, frankly, because there are other aspects of what I wanted to show you about the idea of the human mind, how it operates. You've heard the idea of alpha waves, beta waves, these sort of things. These are waves upon the frequencies upon which the mind works, right? So I thought I had let's see if I've got this here. I had some illustrations of the different waves. So let me see what I did with those. I was just, again, I didn't get down. I was scrambling to put these things together for you guys such that you could see them. I had a chart showing different waves of the alpha, beta, theta waves, the different, I think this is it here. No, that's not it. That will be important in a moment, though. Let's see. This is an interesting one because you should be able to. Let's see if you can see that. Does that help? No, I need to do a screen capture for that. So let's go here. Change this to that. And okay, so let's do instead this. Okay. that, and this, and then that, and then that, and then that should be, whoops, that's not the one I wanted. Huh. That's funny. Okay, so I want that one. Okay, that's what I want. Sorry, I'm just doing this on the fly. Okay, so if you can see this, we're going to take a look. This is the electromagnetic spectra. And what you're looking at in terms of wavelength. So you've got gamma rays all the way to the far left, the lowest X-rays, ultraviolet, and the visible spectrum, as you can see, is tiny little, and then they break it up there according to the nanometer scale, and then you've got infrared, microwaves, and radio frequency. These over on the right-hand side of that scale are ionizing waves, which have a very deleterious effect upon biology and organisms. In fact, again, microwaves is, you put stuff in a microwave to heat it up because it causes energy to happen inside there. All right, so that's what we're doing with that. So let me kind of come back then to this idea here. Okay, so yes, brainwaves, getting into brainwaves. So let's take a look then. Let's see. Let's do this. Okay, so yeah, this is what I wanted to show you on brainwaves. So brainwaves operate at certain frequencies, just like light, sound, electricity. They all operate at different brain frequencies. The brain has billions of cells. Let's kind of back up here. Billions of cells which send electricity to each other. This is based on chemistry. And in combination, they create profound energy, and it creates a pattern. And again, this transmits away from the human body over a distance. The brain waves do change depending on what a person is doing, and they can determine, or I would say indicate, the health or state of a person. But again, keep in mind modulation. If you put an external source of energy and modulate those brain waves, again, what do you think that's going to do to your health or emotional state? That is going to change them. All right, so interesting, the initial phenomenon of what I'm about to show you was described by Christian Huygens, and if you haven't heard that name, if you've looked into cosmology, you know that Huygens is the one who determined or came up with the idea that Venus as a planet would be the same size as Earth, and that's how they came up with a distance to the sun and the angular size versus actual size of the sun. So, he's a Jesuit Illuminati freak. So, this idea of entrainment. So I want to show you this. Let me go to this and show you what entrainment is. Okay, entrainment is the idea that you get multiple things when they're in proximity with one another begin to take on the same attributes. So here you've got the pendulums. These are, what you would practice, metronomes you would practice to with music. They all start off with different, they all start at the different frequency. Note here that they also changed the distance on this so that wherever you put the weight is changes the frequency, right? So that should be the determining factor. But is it? No. Watch what happens. It takes about a minute, but the pendulums begin to entrain with one another. Look at what happens. That is called entrainment. They begin to line up with one another and begin to become cohesive with one another. It becomes stable, and look what happens to the platform it's on. They reinforce each other, and they keep each other going in that same pattern. All right, so let's go back to this idea then. When you have entrainment going, right, now let's think again about the ideas. Here's an alpha brain wave, the awake and relaxed state when meditating. This is also what happens when you watch television. You immediately, within 30 seconds, within a minute, but usually 30 seconds for most people, because again, you've been trained to do it. Oh, it's Pavlovian over time. You go into as soon as you turn on a television, you go into an alpha brainwave. You've noticed you walk into a room, and even if that sound isn't on, and you're not even interested in what's happening, your eyes immediately go to and focus on the screen. It's a phenomenon that you see happen all the time. When people are at concerts, music concerts, they, instead of looking at the people on the stage, they look at the big screens. It is because of the flicker rate and that we've been trained to. But this is 8 to 12 hertz. It says lessens anxiety and stress, but what it really does is it again increases your susceptibility to the power of suggestion. The standard brain state is the beta brain wave, and this is when you're awake, you're in a wide awake state. This will show irregularities with mental health conditions or physical health conditions. It's usually in the 12 to 27 hertz. The gamma brain wave is when you're in a learning or laying down memories. It appears in a wakeful state, and it's above 27 hertz. And then the theta brainwave is when you're asleep. So it's light sleep or very relaxed, and hypnosis and hypnotherapy. And again, you can get into a theta wave state by watching television or media over a long period of time. But you do immediately go into an alpha brainwave state within the first 60 seconds. The delta brainwave is a deep, dreamless sleep state. This is the slowest brainwave at 0.2 to 3 hertz, very, very slow. But keep in mind that the Schumann resonance of the entire Earth is more consistent with the theta brainwave. In the 3 to 8 hertz, it's about 7 hertz is typically what the Schumann resonance runs at. It changes. Okay, what am I saying? What am I trying to get to all this? Well, the idea then with entrainment, right, is that not only when you put people in proximity to one another, will they begin to become entrained or begin to experience some of the same things. One of the things that we have noted is when people have unusual perceptions of time, that is, that their perception of time is either that it's going faster or slower, but those who are near one another all perceive it at the same rate, irrespective of what the actual circumstances are or how they perceive it compared to someone else. And so brainwave entrainment is now commercially available using brain stimulation with pulsed electromagnetic fields. They can then introduce thoughts to you that are not your own, right? And begin to put a variety of thoughts and emotions that were not your own into you, external to you. But that's not the point of what I'm getting to. Here's what I want to get to. That in going through the data of the Awakening Project, one of the things that I had come to was that, so I have told you about, and I've released this little bit of information, that one of the least common Myers-Briggs results is INTJ or ENTJ. INTJ represents just about 1.4 to 1.8%, depending on who you ask, of the overall population. Very small. And when you put an ENTJ, that's even another, it's a small one as well. So between them, it is just over 2% of the entire population. And yet they represent, between those two, a little over 90% of the total of respondents. Early on, it was actually above 95%, but now it's just over 90%, about 91 and some change percent of our respondents. However, we do have respondents in every category. So ENFP, right, ESTJ. So early on, I understood that the NT were the primary things there, and that has to do with intuition versus sensing, and thinking versus judging. And that people who draw their cues from an internal source rather than looking for an external validation would be more likely to break from the mainstream narrative and to find out the truth for themselves. It just makes sense. When you better understand the Myers-Briggs process and the way that we process information, it would certainly make sense that those who are more trusting in their own intuition than sensing or what other people think and getting projection from them. And again, thinking versus feeling, right? Again, feeling would be that you would need to feel a certain way, whereas thinking, you're able to kind of more cognitively address these items. And so when you're looking at things like the nature of Earth, that sort of stuff, it would be, those people would be far more likely to break free from the programming and be, for example, less susceptible to propagation of the power of suggestion and to basically hypnosis. Whereas those who are very keyed in on how they fit into society, what other people think of them, that the appeal to authority and the appeal to consensus are important to some people, that would be a very important thing. However, some of those people are still on the red pill. How does that work? Well, what I began to quickly understand is that it was a variety of things that made this up. It's not a static, it's a very dynamic process, the awakening process. And again, not everybody who's INTJ wakes up, right? But those who are INTJ are more likely to wake up, right, than, for example, ENSF. It's just the way it is. So But it has to do, here's my thought, is with modulation, right? So it has to do with the modulation of frequencies. It is the frequency which you are at. So again, if we were to picture, I have explained before that I think that the way that, for example, the tarot works and the I Ching, casting entrails, casting dice, the way that that works is the interconnectedness of all things. You've got, if I go back to this image here, let me come up to... is this what I'm looking for? Let me see if I'm... Yeah. All right. So if you picture everything is happening that way, and basically billions of these point sources happening, that they all begin to modulate one another, and that they cast an effect. There's energy there. And then when you, let's say, just like you would if you're out golfing, take some grass and you throw it up in the air to see which way the wind is blowing. It's pretty much the same thing. It gives you a sense. So if you cast the tarot and you draw the cards, they're going to be influenced by this thing. And the better you are at interpreting that, the better you would be at getting a sense of it. It's very... Again, it's not clear. I have often described it as trying to look through a glass brick wall, right? You can kind of tell what's on the other side. Is it light? Is it dark? Is there motion? Does it look like a person or a bear? I mean, you could tell some things, but you would have a difficulty determining much beyond that, especially if it's dark. And some days it is, darker than others. Imagine putting, 30 sort of shower curtains together, and you could kind of, again, get motion on the other side. You might be able to determine the gender of the person or their height, but not much beyond that. That's kind of how I describe it. So this is what you're looking at. Everything modulates everything else. And so when the energy gets put out there, and the occult leaders, if you will, have been pushing certain ideas, and they cast this sort of brainwave thing, and they have what we would say lowered the energetic field of everybody, and so they've created a different pattern. And many people have become comfortable with that, and they resonate with it such that they become entrained to it. They are cycling with that, whereas some of us do not, and we're on a different pattern. And we cycle and entrain, and we're cohesive with one another. And so even though we have come from very different backgrounds, right? I've often expressed how delighted I am that we come from very different backgrounds and very different journeys, but we all end up in the same parking lot because we're chasing after truth. And that tells me something, that we're close to something. But the idea, this is what I'm trying to get to, is the idea that those who awaken and those who do not is related to this frequency and vibration. That irrespective of the exact Myers-Briggs thing or your date of birth. Again, there are some corollary clusters there. Doesn't seem to be a huge influence, but again, I don't know enough about like sidereal astrology to know what the other influences are that might create a certain pattern. If we go back to the idea of, let me come up to, let's see what I'm looking for. Is it, let's see this I'm looking for? I want something more along the line of that, right? When you begin to change the frequencies and modulate the frequencies such that it begins to have a self-developing pattern. And those patterns, when they are corollary with one another, will have an affinity for one another. In Scripture, it says that deep calls to deep and spirit unto spirit. And I believe that's what we're experiencing. And that those who wake up do so because their energy, their energetic field pattern, whatever you want to call it, their aura, their vibe. Dude, it's your vibe, man, because you're smaking deep. But basically, their field pattern is inconsistent with what's around them, and they begin to feel a discomfiture, a physical discomfiture with what's happening around them. They can't, it's like the movie The Matrix. You feel it in your mind, like a splinter in your mind. You know something's wrong. You know it when you go to church. You know it when you pay your taxes, right? That something doesn't line up. That's what people are experiencing, and they begin looking for the truth until they find things that resonate with them. And we all say that, right? That just resonates with me. It vibes with me when we hear something that we maybe haven't heard before, but we go, and that's how we use our intuition, right? And your intuition grows. And how does it grow? Again, I think how it is your pattern begins to change to a degree that it goes from an incoherent pattern to a more coherent pattern. And those who understand, again, magnetism would better understand the difference between those and how important a coherent pattern is versus incoherency. And an incoherent pattern can be easily overtaken by a more powerful coherent pattern that will overtake you, and then you will entrain with it. and you will, it will change you. By beholding, you become changed. This is easily observable, even with people with the best intentions who go looking into darkness. It changes them, right? You look into child trafficking and all the crappy shit that these guys do. It darkens you. I mean, you don't want it to, but it hurts you, right? And it creates an impact on you, and it actually creates post-traumatic stress. In the same way as Ken Wheeler was discussing again with the genetic memory. Again, these are all empirically proven that there are genetic memories that we can get from our grandparents' stresses that they've had. And so family secrets and family dynamics can be introduced to us. That I've told the story that in my family, we had secrets, and it was just about keeping family stuff, out of the public eye. And the fact was that even my mom didn't realize where that came from. As it turned out, she didn't know until her mother had senile dementia and was getting near death. And then she found out that the secret was that my mother's grandmother was of the Cherokee Nation, as was her husband. But they were, and during a time period where there was actively hunted. You could go to in the 1920s, even still, you could go to a post office in the state of Oregon, and if you brought a scalp or a pair of ears from an Indian, Native American, they would give you $20, and that was a lot of money then. So they were actively supporting, the killing of Native Americans. So it was not cool, let's put it that way, to be tribal at the time. But Cherokees are in some ways unlike some of the other native tribes, and there were many who were red-headed or blonde-headed, blue and green eyes. Such was the case with my grandmother. She had red hair and green eyes, and my grandfather had very light, almost blonde hair and blue eyes. And so they passed themselves off as Irish. They didn't try to take on a fully white. They thought they would get caught. So at the time, the Irish were also kind of marginalized, but it was a step up from being Cherokee. And so they changed their names and acted as though, and they passed themselves off as Cherokee. But they were, terrified and very secretive about it. And so those secrets got passed down through the family, even without the knowledge. It's fascinating stuff. So genetic memory, and again, here's another thing in Scripture, the sins of the fathers to the 7th and 8th generation, So genetic memory is a thing. It's been, again, empirically proven. But I'm with Ken Wheeler on this. I don't think it's the genes itself. I think it is in the water. There's something in the water. You heard that expression. Don't drink the water, man. I think that's where we're at. I think that is the best explanation for what causes people. Oh, hey, thank you so much, Trey. That's awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's worth a cup of coffee, right? Use good water. My point here is not just about water, but about entrainment and frequency and vibration. If you people have said all the time, I've heard it over and over, when we begin looking into these things, and I've said that the name truth community is something of a misnomer, that we very rarely are able to come to the truth, but we can dismantle the lies around us. And we do a fair amount of that, fairly successfully. But in so doing, right, we tear these lies apart and in an effort to at least thin the veil to some degree. And each of these things begins to change our foundation and our paradigm, such that, for me, again, changing the way I looked at the nature of cosmology and cosmogony was a pretty dramatic one, right? And I went through the grieving process, right? It took a number of days for me to adjust. But there was a sense of freedom afterwards, and I never saw anything the same. But I will say, the discernment that came with that and the ability to tear apart lies was increased 1,000-fold thereafter. I think it has to do with this frequency and resonance and vibration. I think that we are drawn to one another by this same principle of frequency and resonance and vibration. And I think this better describes the nature of why some awaken and some do not. It is not simply a Myers-Briggs test result or an astrological chart. Or it is not, genetics versus environment. Those things play a part. I've said it all the time. It's a dynamic process. It is each of them is an aspect and a factor. But there's not a single one, and you can have a variety of different ones. But ultimately, when you add them all together, the sum being the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. that ultimately we're reaching a state of vibration that is dramatically different than those around us. And they are becoming entrained to one another to a degree that it becomes cult-like, that they cannot express any idea that is different from those around them, or they get canceled. That's the cancel culture. It's a cult. You cannot literally say anything that is divergent in any way, or you get kicked out. So they must hold to that, or they will be ostracized. And yet, some of those characteristics I find still make their way into the truth community, much to my great dismay. But for the most part, people are learning. We can accept one another with a variety of different opinions and viewpoints, whether someone is hip or goes with the idea of, let's say, Tartaria or mud flood. Just don't attack anybody else. Just stay open. If you don't want to research it, or if you feel like there's not as much there as somebody else does, that's okay. Mandela effect, right? And again, some people get really charged up about this, and they focus on one thing like it's the most important thing ever, and they get angry with other people if they don't accept it. Yeah, again, I've said from the beginning, I don't care if you believe what I believe or not. I'm not out to try to convince anybody or convert anybody, whatever you believe in terms of spiritually or the nature of history, right? You're free to believe what you like, and I encourage difference of thought. Because I learn from it. I learn from people who have different views than I do, because I think none of us have all of the picture, and every piece of the puzzle I can get is valuable. Right? I have said before that this is all about gathering these pieces of the puzzle and collecting as many of them as you can. Sometimes they won't fit right then, and they may not work for you. Right? And so as you go through these pieces of the puzzle, you kind of have to figure out what works and what doesn't, what works for you and what doesn't. Sometimes you've got to put those pieces back in the box and set them aside. Some of them may never fit. Some of them may come up again later and you go, oh, that's what that was. Okay, I got you. Again, some of them might be garbage. I've often said, eat the meat and throw away the bones. Because I have found people that I know to be compromised, and I know that they are full of crap, but they will put out a great deal of truth, because you got to have bait in the trap. So I can find stuff there. The trick is, I think, you learn to exercise good discernment, and don't put anybody on a pedestal, right? Don't idolize them, because sooner or later they're going to disappoint you. Even people who have the best intentions, they can be sincere and sincerely mistaken. They can be wrong. Or they'll do something that you don't agree with, and you'll be disappointed, or you'll think bad of them. I would find that unfortunate. Again, just learn on your own good discernment. Most of those people who have good channels that I like to listen to, they're putting out ideas, right? Ideas to look at. I listened to the last episode of Crow 777 with fascination. There was a lot of information there, right? Ultimately, I didn't draw the same conclusions as did the guest. But that doesn't mean that I'm dislike the guest or think less of Crow because he wants to latch on to some of those ideas. It just doesn't work for me. I don't see it that way. Does that mean I'm not going to listen next week? Of course not. I'll listen all the time because there's all kinds of good information there to challenge. And there was information there that I agreed with. There are some, factual, accurate things. Again, I disagree with some of the conclusions. That's fine. And again, I know I don't have all the information myself. So if I get more information, maybe I can make some of those pieces fit together better. And this is what I encourage you to do. That is, hey, thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate that. That is, what's happening, digging the stream? Your favorite true. Well, thank you. Again, I don't play favorites, but I appreciate that. I love that you guys come regularly here in the week, as you all just say, the usual suspects, as I say. I need more water. Hang on. And coffee has water, right? No, I had the coffee already. Okay. So these are ideas I'd like you to just ponder. And if you have to go back and listen again, I hope I did an okay job of trying to lay these things out. I know it was really thick and really deep. But it came to me yesterday just like a lightning bolt. I suddenly, just like, some pieces snapped together, and I went, oh, yeah, right? That this is materially related to the Awakening Project, why some people awaken and some people don't. This in part came, for example, from the conversation that I had with Amanda McLeod, Seven Ravenwolf, who I hope will be able to play that interview for you next week. But what again, we don't see the same views on some of the things that we talked about, but it never for a moment, not even for a moment, did I have the feeling like I needed to correct her or say that's, I don't see it that way. I just wanted to hear what she had to say and find the good stuff, right? Because I resonated with her as a human, as a person, right? This is a person I would love to hang out with. I mean, it's too bad we're so far away physically, but the spirit of the person, right, is exactly the type. And so when I hear, again, Cammie describe things and just mind-blowing stuff, I don't always come to the same conclusions from the same material that she does, but sometimes I do, right? It's not like, oh, wow, that really leads in this direction. That's awesome. Kevlar, oh, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. I'm blushing now. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, again, Bob says some stuff, and mostly I agree with him. Some things I go, nah, I don't see it that way, but I don't feel any need to fight about it or go, Bob's a shill because he said, oh, God, what do you? I mean, I think people who think that way are very short-sighted, right? If they have to attack other people who see things even slightly different. I've often said that, a heretic is somebody who believes almost the same as you do. Right, you have all the same beliefs with the exception of just like a tiny little bit, and suddenly they're the heretic. It's just, I find that very unusual. Call you, Trey Clark. What do you want me to call you? You want to call you potty mouth? No, I know. I'll do that. I'll call you. Give me a minute though. I haven't had breakfast yet. I got some chores to do, but I will call you today actually. So we'll try to hook up a time. I will have to go back through your chat to the chat and hopefully catch all this stuff. I know that there's been some really great stuff in there. I just didn't have it. I couldn't read it while I was trying to put my thoughts together because I struggled to find a way to elucidate what I wanted to say because it's all over the place, right? That's how my brain works, like a freaking pachinko machine. It's like, and I got 30 different threads all running at the same time. It's just, it's difficult. So, you knew it wouldn't stick? Red. I mentioned it earlier. Omnididactic is really cool. I think, again, you put it in different places. It led me to thinking like limited omniscience, right? The idea, but the idea is fabulous. It's good stuff. I don't think you should dismiss it at all. I think you should keep using it, not give up on it, because the idea is incredible. So no, keep doing that, man. This is beautiful stuff. You guys are awesome. Sue, oh my God, you guys. You're making me blush. I don't even know what to say. But I want you to consider these ideas, right? And think about these things, especially in terms of the idea of frequency and resonance and how to modulate your frequency. And again, my encouragement is always to connect with the Creator. I think that is the source of all light and love. And I know it sounds all hokey and like love and the spirit and God. I know it. We've been taught that those things are silly. But my experience tells me that is the most important thing, is we were made in the image of the Creator to be like them. And we need to be connected to life in order to truly live, right? And it's been said that everyone dies, but not everyone truly lives. And that is my encouragement for you today, that every one of you would truly live. And in so doing, despite all the horrible things that we see around us and how frustrating it is, I think ultimately, take heart in this. I mean, the worse things get, the closer it means we are to a change. Because it's ultimately... if you know the Creator, and if you believe in the Creator has always said, love wins, right? That He is bigger than all of it. And so, to me, it is indication of the great possibility that we are in an enormously exciting time, that we might actually see the ultimate conclusion of this. That is a very frightening thing for some people, and it certainly does indicate that there will be many bad things that happen as leading up to that. That is a possibility. Again, I'm not trying to go, the end is near. I'm just saying maybe. I mean, I don't know. But it is. I have seen things that I've never seen before, and certainly seeming to reach kind of a, a pinnacle, if you will, of, and again, stuff that I've never seen. But I keep my eyes open, and I try to use, again, good discernment. I would encourage the same for you. I do want to say thank you so much again for everybody being here. And I have one thing to add before I go, and I'll try to skip back through the chat real quick and to see if there's anything I can pick up or questions to answer. So I would say this: if you want to do more of that, tomorrow I'll be back at 7 o'clock Pacific, and that's 10 o'clock Eastern for Ancient Wisdom for a Modern World. I'll take a look again at the book of Proverbs, and we'll just talk about some of that. Tomorrow evening is the point 5 version of Sola Scriptura, so Wayne will not be with me, but I will take questions about the previous episode or general questions. We'll talk about some of that. But I want to throw this out there. If you are a fan of, or I mean, how can you not be if you know of her, Rose 777? If you caught this last week of the Poppycock Report that I do with her on Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 6 Pacific, 9 Eastern, very early in the morning, you know that her and Jason have kind of bumped into a thing. And this is, again, something that informally Hip and I were discussing before the show, that it does seem that often the more we try to help people, the harder we get kicked. It's just a thing, and it makes you almost not want to help people anymore. But they did that, and they bought a new house, and so they were trying to help what turns out to be the son of, I think, the real estate agent. And for different reasons, he kept saying, well, I needed more of this, more of that. So they had given him a lot of money, like 5 figures, to do modifications on the house to make it wheelchair accessible and friendly for Rose, and so that they could do stuff for his studio. And then, unfortunately, he not only ran off with the money and stopped responding, but also took, like Jason's favorite guitar, that sort of stuff. And it's put him in kind of a spot. As much as I'd like to take care of all of their needs, I don't know if we can do that, but here's the most immediate need, is it puts Rose in a really difficult spot because the house is torn apart and she's wheelchair, and so it requires a great deal of effort. Her and Jason have kind of the same as my wife and I do, which is kind of upside down schedules that cross over, right? So she gets up very early. She does most of her work in the early part of the day. He gets up later, like a musician, right? Musicians don't know that 8 o'clock comes more than once a day. But she needs to rely on him for help to do all the basic stuff, right? And she just really needs a kitchen, a bathroom, and a bedroom. But that's really difficult for her right now. And she does have to go to California for a medical thing. But her option, was maybe stay with her mom until it gets worked out. But her mom is a mask hole. Like really over the top, like, oh my God, you got to wear a mask. And so, she's like, oh my God, I will kill my mother. So it's like no reason to further damage that relationship. She has to be there for 5 days. But I would like to try to figure out a way. I've talked to a couple of people already, and they asked me first, and now I'm just passing it on to you. We'd like to set up again, GoFundMe may take a little bit of time, but we're looking for a way to try to help her out, maybe for a couple of weeks or something. So I was looking at a rental in the area, but most of the places I passed some things on. I talked to Rose about it last night. And this morning, and a couple of the places that I looked at, like vacation rentals, they say wheelchair accessible, but they're not really. They're just kind of like not as crappy, like less stairs or whatever. Maybe like extended stay America might work. We did find one in the New Orleans area that might be about $50 a day. So I looked at like 21 days, 3 weeks was just over $1,000. And so again, I'm calling on you guys. I'm not trying to get in your pockets. But the other options, for example, is that if somebody could maybe stay with them in the Covington area, that could help her out. Rather than her having to count on Jason all the time. Because I can tell you from personal experience, and my wife would be the first to tell you, that it is difficult to have to rely on your partner all the time. You feel guilty and you feel like a burden, and that is and it's difficult for a relationship, even though the intentions are great. So before I just go, straight out and say, ask for your money, I want to say, if you've got ideas or maybe an approach that I haven't thought of, like this just happened, again, last couple of days, that I was familiar. So Thursday I found out, yesterday I was talking to a few people who, emailed me and said, what can we do? And I started, I was, again, really super busy. I just quickly started looking around on Craigslist and different places, like looking at maybe Airbnb, because those people are desperate. But we need to find an appropriate place, at least for a couple of weeks, that she can hole up, that they can get, Jason's trying desperately to get the work done, just the basic stuff to get her in a livable situation. And just like we did, you guys were awesome and helped me. We helped come together and get Dawn, informally hip, a phone. Her phone died. We got jumped all over that. I got it within just hours, was able to send it to her. It arrived, but because across the border, it's stupid, and they charged her a bunch of money to pick it up, and then they had to have more paperwork, even though I filled out all the customs forms and made that work. So hopefully she'll be able to get it today. I emailed them everything that they needed yesterday. So hopefully she'll be able to pick that up today. But just like you guys just rallied immediately and we were able to get her a phone, I would just ask you to reach in your heart. And you guys love Rose, man. You know she has the best of intentions, and she is an amazing person. And she's largely responsible, for you guys knowing me, because I started doing stuff with, with Crow. I became good friends with Rose and Jason. And then, we had talked several times. She wanted to do a channel, and so I kind of talked her into doing the Poppycock Report, and then immediately, she just took off like a bird, and she does streams all the time, and she's got way more subscribers than I do, right? So, I mean, she's awesome. People love Rose, and you can't help it. She's a really terrific person, and I just want to help. I just want to help her out. I don't have, frankly, the money as much as I would just pull it out of my pocket if I could. But I told Dawn also that I was trying to help some other people, and I got we don't have, we were nearly homeless just a couple of years ago. So it's really, we're just digging out of the hole. And I took a couple of hits recently from trying to help people out. It just did not work out well. And it just makes me kind of not want to help people when they just they're just greedy dicks. And it's like, why would you do that? I mean, it makes, just like, why would you bite the hand of somebody trying to feed you? But I can tell you for sure that Rose and Jason aren't that way. Again, they helped me get a keyboard when I didn't have one. It turned out that was broken. I had to do other things and trying to fix that still, but that's part of the issues that I've been having, is just try to make things work. But these things are all very costly, and again, they just bought a house. And they got screwed over by their landlord. They were supposed to be able to stay where they were at until they could get the repairs made, and then the landlord said nope and kicked them out. And so they had to do everything within just a few days. And then they get there, and then the guy that they had contracted to do the stuff just ran off with their money and then stole their gear. So it's like, one thing after another. I can't go there to help them, or I would be on the next plane because of my responsibilities here. But if you can help, again, hit me up. My email is it's in the show description, but it's unintended consequences3@gmail.com. If you want to make a donation, for her, you can either, of course, she's got a PayPal you can hit up, or you can send it to me. Just make sure that you put for Rose on there, and we're going to try to circle the wagons and see what we can get done, because she's going to California, and she'll be back on the 25th. So the 20th to the 25th, she'll be in California, and I want to be able to get her a place where she can comfortably be, that's close to where she is, so she can still be, with Jason, or if you want to, send her on a cruise or something, I'm sure she'd like that too, and that'd be awesome. But whatever we can do, whether it's to have somebody help her in the home that they're in, or if we can put her up in a hotel that's appropriate for a while. I mentioned Extended Stay America because I had stayed there when, again, we were almost homeless, and it's got a kitchen, and it's kind of a nice place, and you can, if you stay there for a long period, they've got all the, dishes and everything, so you can, it's like a little home away from home, like an efficiency apartment, and you can usually negotiate a pretty fair deal. So maybe something like that would work, or if we can find somebody who can stay with them to help out, whatever it takes, right? I'm just committed to whatever it takes. I want to take care of this girl. They are huge members of this community. They're always willing to help other people. They helped me, right? And I kept trying to tell them no, and they insisted on helping me get a keyboard. And again, I just want to say, if you can, hit me up, give me ideas, right? I'll do my best to respond. I'm really crazy busy this weekend. There's just been so much going on that I haven't talked about. But if you just let's circle the wagons and see what we can do to help these people out, because they are pillars of our community. They've I've never heard them badmouth anybody, even when people attack them and accuse them of being, you know, witch and a warlock and Satan worshipers. They just kind of laughed, and I mean, it hurt their feelings. It didn't make them mad. It just hurt their feelings because it's not true. So anyway, but I don't want to belabor the dead. I don't want to beat the dead horse here. You know where I'm coming from. You know that this is a place of genuine compassion and caring, and I want to get the word out. So I'm going to try to hit up some other people in our community that have a lot more, again, a lot more followers than I do. I don't even consider it followers. You guys are just my friends. I just have you over to my house on the weekend, right? That's how I look at it, because I really do care about you guys. So anyway, that's the pitch. If you have ideas, let me know, and I want to help these people, right? So there's that. And with that, I think that's where we'll leave it today. Just a reminder, join me at 7 o'clock a.m. Pacific, and that's for Ancient Wisdom for a Modern World tomorrow. It'll be fairly short, but we'll just go through again, more of the book of Proverbs and spend a little time together there. And then tomorrow evening, that's going to be at 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern, just to dig in a little bit more, just to recap of where we were. Again, we won't belabor the point. We'll just spend a little time together. And then Tuesday and Thursdays with Rose 777 at Rose 777 channel at 6 o'clock a.m. Pacific, 9 Eastern. And usually I show up for Secrets of Saturn on Wednesday night with Jason and Wayne at his channel, Secrets of Saturn. So with that, thanks very much, guys, for being here. And again, genuine love for all you guys. This is the highlight of my week. Again, when I started today, I didn't really feel like doing it. It's been just so crazy, and I was just kind of beat down. But spending the time with you and seeing you guys in the chat and your responses has been outstanding. I will go back and read the chat, I promise. So I'll catch anything that I missed. I just wasn't able to during the stream today because I was trying desperately to get these ideas across. They're complex, and again, something that just hit me in a flash, and then it's like, okay, it's going to take me 2 hours to maybe describe that, right? Because I have to go through all the background material. But again, thank you guys so much love for each of you, and we'll see you again soon.